Before we proceed to the next speaker, I would like to acknowledge the presence of their graces, Bishop Peter of Chicago and Midwestern America, Bishop Theodosi of Seattle, both of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, and His Grace Bishop Maxim of Western America of the Serbian Orthodox Church. Welcome. Our next speaker is Dr. Nicolás Grovs, who is a library director and librarian at Joe Bully Library of New Gračanica Diocese. He received his PhD in Midwest history from the University of Chicago in 1983. In his career, he has written several articles in medieval and Byzantine studies and given papers at various congresses. He currently lives with his wife Carolyn in South Hadley, Massachusetts, and commutes frequently to New Gračanica. He has taught courses in American religious history at St. Sava School of Theology in Libertyville, Illinois, and has edited 2 volumes of the Missionary Letters of St. Nikolai Velimirovich. Most recently, he has edited and written an introduction to St. Mardaria's Incomprehensible Russia. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nicolás Grovs, who will give a presentation entitled Reflection on the newly published memoirs of Bishop Mardarија. Welcome.
Can everyone hear me and I'm not shouting either? Okay. I am basically, the talk I'm giving is based on the recently edited, I was the editor, book of Mardarија called Incomprehensible Russia, which I understand is going to be very soon, maybe even today or tomorrow, available. So I'm going to be quoting from that book, which I find a rather remarkable document. My emphasis is going to be a little different from my predecessor. I'm going to talk about Mardarија in the New World and how his experiences in Russia, at least in my opinion, really prepared him for understanding the United States in a way that we might not imagine, that his Russian experiences, in a way almost uniquely, helped him in this very different world. And I'm going to draw on some things in American religious history to talk about this. I've entitled my talk, A Monastery and a City on a Hill. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay. I would like to talk briefly about a young man and the monastery and church he built, Bishop Mardarија and St. Sava Monastery, about a monastery which became a city on a hill that is a beacon and source of prayer and of unity for an entire people. Probably without conscious knowledge in building St. Sava and in his work of organizing the young Serbian church in America, Mardarија placed himself within one of the most important traditions of American religion, that of the city on the hill, and of, quote, end quote, errand in the wilderness. In doing so, Mardarија, very much in his own fashion, and this is a basic thesis here, joined the ranks of some of the earliest American immigrants and colonists, the Puritans of Massachusetts, unconsciously, of course, building a little portion of God's kingdom on earth. They and Mardarија were immigrants with a mission. In July of 1917, Mardarија was chosen and appointed by the Holy Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church to North America for the sake of supplementing the much-needed organization of the Serbian church there. By that time, Mardarija, who had come to Russia as a student in 1905, had distinguished himself in many ways as an author of a few books of sermons and reflections that he had written in Russia, and most of all, as a promoter of Serbian and Pan-Slavic causes through both stirring speeches and newspaper articles. Many of these, in fact, I would say all of them, are not edited. I mean, there's an open field for anyone who wants to write a doctoral dissertation in Balkan studies by going through Russian newspapers and finding these articles and doing research on them. There are quite a few, apparently. But as we just heard, very interestingly enough, Mardarija, and this is very excitingly told by him in his book, he was basically a marked man in Russia at the time of the revolution, and then as the Bolsheviks became more influential. I mean, he writes about being followed by German spies. He writes about having people calling his address constantly. He knew that he was a marked man. He was also a marked man very much because he deliberately, and this is a fascinating chapter in the book, there's a chapter about his relations with Rasputin, and he deliberately took him on. He knew who he was, he knew what he stood for, he knew the risk to himself, but he took him on. It's a fascinating chapter. So he had enemies among Rasputin's followers, among the Germans, who recent scholarship has shown, and I say recent, I mean the most recent there is, the last few months, that the Germans underwrote the Russian coup d'etat. They sent, there are a couple of books just recently written about how Lenin was sent by the Germans to undermine Russia. So Mardarija was a persona non grata to all of those people, and also to various elements of the Russian aristocracy that I think my predecessor was talking about, who did not want their world disturbed and saw Mardarija and Pan-Slavism as a disturbing of their universe. So when Mardarija left, just one step ahead of assassins, according to himself. If you don't believe this, this is something you read in the book. He talks about it. He knew that he had just escaped with his life. And what I would like to indicate, without going into terribly long detail about this, is that when Mardarija came to the United States, he came to a church that was undergoing its own particular kind of crisis. I'm talking here about the Serbian communities in America. His main emphasis in his work in the United States was to try to bring unity to very disparate and quarreling communities. And my thesis is that his emphasis on unity got a great deal of background from his Pan-Slavic interests. Now, I'd like to quote here, if I can, Mardarija's vision of the unity of the Serbian church in America. It's given very clearly in his address given at the First Assembly. I believe that was in 1923, the First Assembly of the formal assembly of the Serbian church. And he writes and he says, "The Lord gave me the fortune to live and see today the opening of the Church People's Assembly, the fruit of my own and your work of many years, and the guarantee that the life of the Serbian church in America and Canada will be what it ought to be. It seems to me like everything is a dream. It seems to me like these are still some kind of negotiations and agreements. But actually, we are facing reality. This is the assembly which will solve our most important question in the diaspora, the question of the Serbian Orthodox diocese, in which everyone will be put in their place, where they belong according to our moral and spiritual strength. And he goes on to say, "Come, all of you, from all over America and Canada." And I want you to note here the scriptural language. "Come, all of you, from all over America and Canada, to the Serbian Zion, St. Sava Monastery. Rise up in a national rebellion." These are his exact words. "Set out armed with swords and with divine faith in a bright future and our beloved Serbdom, and set foot on the soil of the Serbian Zion. Remove the shoes from your feet so that they may step on sacred soil, the property of St. Sava, of the Serbian people, in this foreign land, wet with Serbian sweat, toil, and tears." And he goes on, I won't quote all of this, he goes on in great detail with this biblical image, and he quotes the prophet Micah. Now, the only way to avoid it, he goes in great detail on this. Now, I'd like to point out, this is very interesting in my study of American religion, these words are remarkably similar to those that were written about 300 years earlier by the English Puritan John Winthrop, who exhorted and encouraged his colonists on their arrival on the shores of what would be the Massachusetts Bay Colony to build, and this is the title of my talk, "A City on a Hill." And this is Winthrop, I'm putting this in modern English. "Now, the only way to avoid a shipwreck of our enterprise and to provide for those who come after us is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to have mercy, to walk humbly with our God. For this end, we must be knit together in this work as one man. We must entertain each other in brotherly affection. We must be willing to abridge ourselves of our superfluities, that is, do more with less, for the providing of others' needs. Consider that we shall be a city upon a hill," referring to Matthew 5:14. "The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we deal falsely with our God in this work, we may bring him to withdraw his present help from us, and we shall become a story and a byword through the world. We shall surely perish out of the good land that we have been given. Therefore," Winthrop ends, "let us choose life," so that's from Deuteronomy, "that we and our seed may live, by obeying his voice and cleaving to him, for he is our life and our prosperity." Now, I say that I believe that Mardarија found in Russia, and in Russian ideals, something that he could use to start and work his own mission in America. And this may seem strange, but I think that there are certain virtues that he saw, and in order to illustrate this, I would have you read, when it comes out, the two last or close to last chapters of his work, Incomprehensible Russia, where he writes about what he calls the Slavic ideal or idea, and then he talks about the enemies of Slavdom. But what he does very interestingly is to isolate certain particular virtues that he sees as Slavic virtues. And what I would emphasize here is that his pan-Slavism or Slavic emphasis is saying that the Slavic virtues are not enclosing. They are not like Slavdom means going back on yourself as either Russian or Serbian or whoever and holding just to your own values. But the Slavic virtues are virtues that are universal. These are for the whole world. That if you follow the Slavic virtues, these are for the entire human race. He talks first of all, among other things, about what he calls meekness, and I'm using this from the translation I got. He says, Slavdom is endowed with meekness to a high degree, that even in moments of triumph, with the world at its feet, it knows how to retain its humility, and is thus still able to respect the rest of humanity and hold it at a high value. This humility, which the Russian philosopher Khomyakov praised both as a thinker and as a Slavophile, is not a quality that is held in the Western world. So we Westerners aren't very humble. With meekness goes mercy. This is Mardarија again. With meekness goes mercy. The heart of the Slav throbs with sympathy for the whole human race. I have to contrast this very much with the image of Russia that we are now getting in our press. The image of what could be called a despotic land, a land of murderers, gangsters. If you read our press, you have no idea that there is another kind of Slavic world. But Mardarија says it begins with mercy. Also, hospitality. Slavic hospitality is proverbial. This is Mardarија. Its immediate source is the heartfelt kindness of the Slavs. Both hospitality and cordiality have their roots in ancient times. The old-time Slavs made strangers welcome in their homes, and should any harm be done them, would avenge it as if it had been done to themselves. They left their doors wide open and food laid out on the table, so that the tired traveler might come in and recover his strength without delay. The inspiration for all of this is a deep Christian faith. To quote Mardarија, the Holy Cross has shone upon Slavic kindness. It has also been a guiding light to Slavic communities in their struggle with poverty. And I think here of our, and I am probably could say Serbian by adoption only, but what I know of Serbian communities growing up in the early 20th century struggling in the New World. A sense of justice is not just for universal causes, but for the rightness of nations to protect themselves from aggression. Mardarија witnessed for this personally, and it nearly cost him his life as he exposed and worked against the collusion of certain elements, as I mentioned earlier, of a decaying Russian aristocracy, German agents, and the Bolsheviks, who were their beneficiaries. These are but a few of the Slavic virtues and strengths Mardarија elevates as worthy of his audience's support. And to read more of these, read the book when it's available. I would say that the most important thing for Mardarија in his work in the church that he gathered from his time in Russia, that he brought to America, was an emphasis on the need for unity. He never used the word sobornost, but I think he wouldn't object if it were given to him that these communities needed to learn to work together. That unless that would happen, we would all perish individually, and there would be certainly no city on the hill. So why is Russia important? At the end of his text, he has a chapter, this is the last chapter, titled Regeneration. There he explains that Russia's most recent sufferings and revolution are purgings that will prepare her to be a source of hope for the entire world. Quote, "The evil years," he's writing this in probably close to 1935, very close to his death. So this is after like 2 decades of revolution and beginning of Stalin's worst years. "The evil years will pass, and the light of Christ will dawn upon the Russian land. A longing for Christ and his church will awaken in the heart of Russia. And like a prodigal son, it will be, after its years of wandering, drawn into the bosom of the great and forgiving Christ. But it is too early yet. The time is not ripe. That the fire which has tortured Russia," I'm thinking here of the revolution and all of the purges even starting at that time, "that her torrents of blood and tears, that her torments shall not have been in vain, that they shall purge her, that eternal peace in Christ shall follow them, is my dearest wish. It is painful to watch the sufferings of a man, but heartbreaking to watch those of a whole nation. Yet I believe that man is purged through suffering, and that the true metal is only disengaged from the crude ore by the heat of the furnace." Mardarија concludes, "My firm conviction is that the Russian people, through its sufferings, is on its way to the world's arena with the greatest message of regeneration for humanity." That's quite a quote there, in light of what was happening in Russia at that very moment. Shortly after writing these words, Mardarија was to pass on to another shore, his prophetic words waiting to be fulfilled. My conclusion, and I would urge you to read, I hope this book is coming out because there's so much in there, and I'm just highlighting. There is much in Bishop Mardarīja's text on incomprehensible Russia. His text, by the way, comes from a poem of the famous Russian poet Tchutchev, 19th century poet who was greatly influenced by Slavophilism and German Romanticism. And he writes a poem about Russia is incomprehensible to the mind. It has to be understood by the heart. And that is the exact title of Mardarīja's book. So I say that there's much in Bishop Mardarīja's text, like the poem of Tchutchev, that we can ponder. Mardarīja asks us to look beyond appearances. I'm thinking of his work in all of these councils and his interminable visits to communities and dealing with the strife of that time in parishes. Mardarīja asks us to look beyond all of these things, to try to comprehend or open our minds and hearts to what may seem incomprehensible. As in the Gospels, somehow points of weakness can be the sources of strength. The values of a people are tried in the hardest moments. As is the way with saints, Saint Mardarīja in particular, it is often in the reconciling of seeming opposites, in the bringing together of people and communities who quarrel, that the way to salvation is found. Saints can point to the path ahead, a path we might not otherwise recognize. It is a path that begins with recognizing and honoring people we frequently forget. It is Abraham honoring the angels in our midst. It is a bold and a daring path. It is a journey sustained by prayer and hope. As a great American, John Fitzgerald Kennedy urged us not so long ago, quote, "With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth God's work must truly be our own. Thank you.